Hey guys, welcome to Sleepy History. Tonight we're going to step back into a world that smells like manure, sounds like clanking iron and moaning oxen, and feels, well, very damp. Welcome to medieval Europe, not the castles and knights part. No, you're not the king or even the squire. You're the peasant. You're the one who shovels, trudges, scrapes by, and wakes up each day already behind. Your boots are thin, your back hurts, and your dinner is, let's face it, pretty sad. And while there are a few tiny comforts tucked into the hay, most of the time, you're cold, tired, and one bad harvest away from starvation. You probably won't survive this century. You may not survive this decade. But hey, that's just the reality of being born on the bottom rung in a world with very few ladders. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your local time and where you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these sleepy little stories travel. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up before dawn. Not because an alarm clock goes off, but because your thatched roof lets in just enough wind to slap you in the face. Your straw mattress has collapsed in the middle again, and your right side is numb from sleeping on dirt. The air smells of smoke, sheep, and something else that might once have been soup. You sit up, rubbing your eyes. Somewhere, a rooster crows. Too late. You should have already been milking the cow. Your one-room hut groans as you step outside. There's mud everywhere, on your boots, in your house, on your face. Even the air feels muddy. Your home is made from wattle and daub, sticks, straw, and yes, more mud. The walls leak. The roof leaks. You leak, probably, emotionally. Life as a peasant in medieval Europe isn't about comfort. It's about surviving one day so you can repeat the exact same thing tomorrow. You don't own the land you live on. That's your lord's. You don't own most of what you produce. That's his too. You're not even sure you own your own sheep. There's a 50-50 chance they were actually loaned to you, in perpetuity, by your cousin who also doesn't technically exist in any legal records. Your workday begins before the sun is up and doesn't end until long after it's gone. If it's winter, you work in the cold. If it's summer, you sweat and hope your sweat doesn't attract more flies. Historians still argue whether the typical medieval peasant worked more or less than the average modern person. But one thing's certain, your work is manual, repetitive, and entirely dependent on the weather. And let's talk about that weather. It's raining again. The path to your lord's fields is a slurry of muck. Your foot gets stuck, and when you yank it free, your shoe stays behind. Doesn't matter. You walk barefoot the rest of the way, one toe quietly wondering if that squish was a worm or something worse. The fields aren't just your job, they're your lifeline. You tend barley, rye, and oats. Wheat, if you're lucky, though you usually aren't. Your tools are wooden, dull, and occasionally possessed by splinters. Iron tools exist, but you can't afford them. You tried to buy one once, but then you remembered you also needed to pay your tithes, taxes, rent, and possibly a fine for letting your goat wander into the chapel last week. Oh yes, the goat. It's tethered beside your home, bleeding mournfully, possibly judging you. The goat eats better than you do on most days. You break mid-morning for a bit of bread and maybe some ale. Breakfast is not a concept. It's more of a pause between suffering. The bread is hard, like really hard. You once saw it bounce. The ale isn't strong, just enough to dull the hunger and help keep the parasites confused. You share everything with your family, your house, your food, your illnesses. You're already on your third round of lice this year. Your sister calls hers Gregory. You've developed a kind of emotional bond with your fleas. It's the only consistent relationship in your life. And still, you go on. You plow, you weed, you harvest, you carry things that are too heavy, climb things that are too high, and dig until your hands are raw. The good news? No one expects you to live past 40, so retirement planning isn't really an issue. In the village, things aren't much better. Your neighbors are just as hungry, just as cold, just as skeptical about the local priest's sudden acquisition of a new pair of imported sandals. Gossip is one of your few joys. So is watching the pigs fight. You root for the smaller one, even though it always loses. At sunset, you return home. Your children are asleep on the floor, wrapped in old sacks. Your partner is boiling something in a pot. You don't ask what. You hope it's edible. You eat in silence. Maybe there's a song or two, if someone isn't too tired to hum. You pass around a piece of cheese. It has a blue spot. You eat it anyway. There's no firewood left, so the fire goes out early. You lie down beside your family, on the straw, under a wool blanket that smells like wet sheep. You scratch at your neck. Gregory says goodnight. You close your eyes and try not to think about the taxes due next week, or the rumor that a nobleman from the next shire is coming to inspect the village, or the fact that your only pair of decent boots were last seen floating down the river during the last storm. Life isn't fair, but it's consistent, and that's something, but it's not enough to keep your stomach from growling again. As you lie there, curled beside your snoring family and a slowly dying fire, your thoughts drift, not to love or art or music, but to food, or rather, the depressing approximation of food you're expected to survive on. Because being a medieval peasant doesn't just mean working like a mule, it means eating like one too. Your meals are about function, not flavor. You eat to stay alive, not to enjoy it. Bread is the staple, sure, but forget about anything soft or warm or crusty. What you've got is dark, dense, and hard enough to double as a self-defense weapon in a tavern brawl. Sometimes it's barley bread, sometimes rye. If the harvest was bad, it's whatever random grains you could scrounge, mixed with ground-up beans or peas, and maybe a bit of sawdust if someone's being especially experimental. You've bitten into pebbles multiple times. It's just a risk you accept now. And meat? Rare as a sunny festival day. The nobility hunt for sport. You hunt for scraps. If a rabbit stumbles into your path and there are no witnesses, well, no one needs to know. But if you're caught poaching on the Lord's land, you're looking at punishment ranging from a fine to losing your hand. Historians still argue whether enforcement varied by region, or if local lords just enjoyed surprise cruelty. So most of your protein comes from pulses, beans, lentils, and the ever-glorious dried peas. You might supplement with eggs from your scrawny chicken, if it didn't freeze to death last winter, or a pinch of cheese from the neighbor's goat, assuming Gregory hasn't gotten to it first. And then there's pottage, the ever-present, eternally bubbling, vaguely vegetal stew. It's both meal and metaphor, a grim reminder that nothing in peasant life ever truly changes. You dump in leeks, cabbage, onions, maybe some herbs. If it's a special day, you get a few chunks of bacon rind or leftover bones to gnaw on. You stir, you reheat, you stir again. After 4 days, you stop questioning what's floating in it. Your only beverage option is ale, thin, weak, but at least safer than most water. It's what the kids drink too, not to get drunk, just to avoid the exciting bacteria parade that comes with well water. Wine exists, but not for you. You once tried it at a feast and immediately choked on the sheer shock of flavor. Holidays are different. On feast days or saints' days, you might get a rare treat. roasted goose if the village pooled its resources, or sweet pastries if someone's grandmother has secret honey stashed away. There's even dancing and singing, and someone inevitably drinks too much ale and falls into a ditch. It's beautiful. But that's not today. Today is boiled root vegetable day. Again, turnips if you're lucky, beets if you're not. You eat in silence, chewing the same fibrous bite until it just sort of gives up and slides down your throat. And in the cold seasons, when the garden's empty and the root cellar looks like a hollowed out disappointment, you start scraping by on dried peas, barley porridge, and whatever you salted in the fall. You get creative, you get desperate, you try to ignore the gnawing ache that settles in your belly every night like an uninvited guest. Which brings you, finally, to taxes. Because as you're spooning up the last bit of pottage, trying to ignore the mystery lump, you remember that you don't even own this food. Not really. Your lord demands a portion of your crops, your livestock, your labor, and yes, your pantry. You pay rent in grain, work the Lord's fields for free during harvest season, and offer up gifts like eggs and poultry throughout the year. If you're lucky, you keep just enough to survive. If you're unlucky, you borrow food. If you're really unlucky, you borrow from the church. And the church always remembers. So, you keep your head down. You give what you're told to give. The Lord's men come by in spring to measure your grain, and again in autumn to weigh it. You don't argue. You nod. You offer them your best smile, which isn't much, considering the state of your teeth, and pray they don't take more than agreed. Because the land you farm isn't yours, not even close. It belongs to the local lord, along with the pastures, the forest, the mill, the pond, and on bad days, your dignity. He lives up in the manor house, looming over your village from a hill like a smug hawk. You've seen him a few times. Boots made of leather, not straw. Hands so clean, you wonder if he's ever held a shovel. He probably hasn't. What you have is called a tenancy, which sounds official, but really just means you're allowed to work a patch of land as long as you pay your dues, obey the rules, and don't die inconveniently. You owe him labor services, a certain number of days each week where you drop your own crops and go work his fields instead. Harvest time is the worst. Your own crops could be withering, but you're out stacking barley for his granaries. And heaven help you if you miss a day. His steward keeps records. He always knows. Somehow. You also owe rent, paid not in coins, because you don't have many, but in kind. Eggs, hens, a bushel of oats, that one half-dead goat you've been trying to hide. Some years, you even owe him your ox for plowing season. That ox is more valuable than your thatched roof, and watching it strain under someone else's yoke makes your stomach knot in a very specific, bitter way. The worst part? You can't leave. Legally, you're bound to the land. Not quite a slave, but not exactly free either. You're a serf tied to the manor, generation after generation. If you want to marry someone from a different village, you need permission. If you want to become a monk, permission. If you want to move away and start over, good luck with that. The road is long, dangerous, and full of tolls, thieves, and suspicious stares. And yet, it's not all iron chains. Some lords are better than others. You've heard stories of a reeve in the next county who only takes half his due and lets peasants graze sheep freely in the commons. They say he smiles at the children and prays with the old. Probably a myth, but you like to believe it anyway. Your own lord rarely speaks to you. His steward does. The steward is thin-lipped, always cold-eyed, and terrifyingly fond of fines. You stepped on church grass last month and ended up owing a loaf of bread. It's hard to argue with someone who writes your name in ink. There's the forest too, technically the king's, but watched over by your lord. You're not allowed to hunt there, or chop trees, or even gather fallen branches sometimes, depending on who's on patrol. But it's the only place to find mushrooms, firewood, or the occasional deer if you're bold, or desperate enough. Historians still argue whether peasants truly felt enslaved by this system, or whether they accepted it as the natural order of things. Maybe both are true. You know the Lord provides protection. He hires the men with swords. If raiders come, it's his walls you run to. If a legal dispute arises, it's his court that decides. Still, it's hard to feel grateful when you're dragging your broken rake through frozen soil while your protector drinks spiced wine and complains about the hunt. There are moments, though, rare but real, when you catch a glimpse of your own quiet power, when your fellow villagers come together to fix a roof, share a feast, or sing around a bonfire, when you help a neighbor thresh wheat and they repay you with a jar of honey, when a baby is born and everyone shows up with a little something, even if it's just a smile. The Lord may own your labor, but he doesn't own your spirit. And yet, even that spirit gets frayed, especially when your tunic is falling apart, your back is sore, and winter is creeping in again like a slow, sharp thief. Winter doesn't ask permission, it just arrives, quiet, grey, and heavy. The wind seeps through every crack in your home, and your tunic, once brown, now a threadbare greyish colour, is barely holding together. You tie it at the waist with a bit of frayed rope and pull it tighter, pretending that helps. Your wardrobe is not what anyone would call a collection. It's more like a single stubborn outfit that refuses to die. You have one tunic, one, made of coarse wool, scratchy as hay, and dyed with plants that turned it the colour of despair. You own shoes, sort of. They're made of stitched leather scraps, and they've been repaired so many times they now resemble a patchwork of regrets more than footwear. There's no cotton, no linen, and certainly no silk. That's for the lords and their courtly dramas. You once saw a noble woman in a blue silk gown with gold embroidery and nearly forgot to breathe. You were 7. You're still not sure if it was a real person or some kind of shimmering hallucination. And you don't just wear clothes, you sleep in them. There's no closet, no chest of drawers. Just you, your tunic, and the slow collapse of modesty over time. You wash them rarely because washing wool is difficult and time-consuming. Also, soap is expensive, and warm water, luxury. If it rains hard enough, you stand outside and call it laundry. Lice, fleas, and other delightful hitchhikers make your garments their permanent residence. Everyone itches, everyone scratches. You stop caring after a while. Gregory has cousins. They live in your seams now. Even weddings don't guarantee new clothes. A bride might get a fresh headscarf, a slightly cleaner smock, or, if she's truly lucky, borrowed shoes. But fashion isn't about expression, it's about survival. You need clothes that hold up to work in the field, that won't rip when you're hauling sacks of barley or chasing your neighbor's pig off your roof again. Historians have found inventories of peasant possessions, and they read like minimalist challenges. 1 tunic, 1 cloak, 1 hood, 1 pair of shoes, if lucky, 1 belt, and maybe a pair of hose. The hose are woolen, itchy, and not especially helpful in winter, but they beat bare legs, marginally. You remember the year of the harsh frost when your cloak froze stiff overnight. You had to bang it against the wall to make it wearable again. It sounded like hitting a frozen rug. You walked to the fields, crunching audibly with every step, your breath a visible ghost in the air. Children often wear hand-me-downs until they fall apart, literally fall off the body. Some go barefoot year-round. Babies are wrapped in whatever rags can be spared or swaddled in strips of old sacks. Fashion magazines would have a field day. And let's not forget church. Even if your cloak smells like goat and your shoes have holes, you show up on Sundays. You kneel beside your neighbors, clutching your frayed hood, pretending you're not cold. If you're lucky, the priest says something encouraging. If not, he lectures about sin and tithes, and you walk home feeling vaguely condemned. You dream sometimes of color. Reds, blues, greens. Most dyes fade quickly unless they're the expensive kind. Your everyday clothes are dull and earth-toned. Practical, yes, but they blur into the landscape. One time, a traveling peddler came through, wearing a red cap. Just red. And it nearly started a riot. Even funerals don't come with black robes or veils. You wear what you always wear. The body is wrapped, sometimes sewn into a shroud if one can be spared, and lowered into the earth in the same clothes they lived in. Modesty fades with poverty. Still, there's a strange kind of dignity in it all. You know every patch on your sleeve, every stitch sewn by your mother's hands, the way your cloak hangs, just right when the wind kicks up. You might be poor, but you're not careless. And if you're ever given a small scrap of color, maybe a red thread, a bit of blue ribbon, or a silver brooch from your grandmother, you guard it like treasure. You wear it on feast days. You show it off in subtle ways. You let it remind you that beauty, even in the mud, still matters. Your reflection in the river may look tired, patched, and sunken, but there's strength in that face. There's history in every wrinkle, every fray. You pull your cloak tighter and step into the wind, ready to work. Because no matter what you wear, the fields are waiting. There's never a moment when the land doesn't need something from you. Plowing, planting, weeding, harvesting, hauling. Even in winter, when the ground freezes solid and the winds scream like angry ghosts, there's still firewood to chop, animals to tend, and fences to mend. You wake before the sun again. You always do. Your body aches in the same places it did yesterday, and you stretch in slow, practiced motions that only slightly reduce the stiffness. Outside, a thin crust of frost glimmers across the ground. It looks beautiful. It feels cruel. Work is your life, not a part of your life, not something you clock into and out of. You're born into labor, and you'll die in it. There are no weekends, no time off, no word for burnout, because everyone is burned out all the time. That's just existence. Your hands are your tools, blistered, calloused, cracked. You wrap them in scraps of cloth when they bleed, and keep going. You've got a wooden plow, dull and temperamental, and a single ox that probably resents you. Together, you scratch lines into the soil and pray for rain. Not too much, though. Remember last spring? There's a rhythm to the work, a season for everything. You follow the wheel of the year like it's scripture. In spring, you sow barley, oats, and peas. In summer, you weed constantly, sweating through every layer, your skin going red, then brown, then back to raw. In autumn, the harvest comes, quick, frantic, make or break. And in winter, you hope you stored enough to make it through the cold. The tools are few and basic. A hoe, a sickle, a wooden rake, maybe a flail if you're threshing grain. Iron tools exist, sure, but they're rare and expensive, and the blacksmith has a backlog longer than the local prayer list. If the work isn't in the fields, it's in the home. Grinding grain into flour using a querned stone, backbreaking, tedious and loud. Fetching water from the nearest well or stream. Herding sheep, feeding chickens. mucking out stalls, spinning wool, mending clothes, repairing carts. There's always something to do, something you forgot, something already falling apart. You do it all because you have to, because no one else will, because survival doesn't leave room for options. Historians still debate just how many hours a medieval peasant worked per day. Some argue it was less than a modern office job. After all, daylight limits your schedule. But that leaves out the intensity, the lack of rest, the aching repetition. You don't stop when you're tired. You stop when the sun disappears behind the hills and the geese start waddling home. And even then, you don't really stop. You clean tools, you mend broken handles, you help your neighbor if their fence collapsed again. Or maybe you just sit in the fading light, feet in a basin of cold water, listening to someone hum, an old tune you half remember from childhood. On rare occasions, work is communal. A barn raising, a shared harvest. Everyone pitches in, and for a brief, strange moment, it feels less like labor and more like living. There's laughter, jokes. Someone brings a jug of stronger ale. You forget the pain. You forget the dirt under your nails. But most days, it's just you and the field, and the knowledge that tomorrow it'll be the same. The days blur. One turns into the next. You mark time by the state of the crops, by how low the firewood stack has gotten, by how many new holes are in your roof. Seasons shift subtly at first. Cooler mornings, a change in bird songs, the way your boots squelch more than crunch. And then one day, you wake up coughing. It starts small, a tickle. But by midday, half the village is sneezing, wheezing, sweating. You trudge to the field anyway, because what else can you do? You can't afford to rest, so you swing your hoe with a slow, deliberate rhythm. You watch the clouds roll overhead. You count the rows left to dig. And you wonder, quietly, not for the first time, how much longer you can keep doing this. Because the land never gets tired, but you do. Coughing turns to chills. You try to hide it at first. Keep working, keep your head down, but your knees shake and your breath comes out in short, ragged bursts. By nightfall, half the household is unwell. Someone's child won't stop crying. Someone else hasn't moved in hours. You keep moving, slowly, as if momentum alone could scare it away. Illness doesn't knock in the Middle Ages. It crashes through the door and settles in like it's always lived there. Everyone shares the same room, the same smoke-thick air, the same wooden spoon. You can't isolate. You can barely breathe. There are no doctors here, no medicine that actually works. The best you can hope for is an old woman with drying herbs and a small prayer whispered in Latin she doesn't understand. She gives you yarrow tea and tells you to burn rosemary near the door. It helps a little, or maybe you just want it to. If it gets worse, they say to pray. So you go to church and kneel beside others who are just as pale and damp with sweat. The priest talks of sin, the candles flicker. Someone faints halfway through the homily and is dragged to the back. You don't look. Most recover, some don't. When a child dies, it is met with silence, not ceremony. There's no doctor to blame, no treatment to question. Just a cloth over the face and a grave out back. And you're still expected to make it to the fields the next morning. Sometimes it's a cold, sometimes it's worse. Plague doesn't need an invitation. Buboes swell, limbs darken, families vanish in a week. You've heard stories of villages where no one's left to ring the bell, of priests too frightened to offer last rites, of burial pits filled at night so the neighbors won't panic. Historians still argue how much peasants understood about disease. Some say they believed it was bad air. or divine punishment. Others think you understood more than anyone gave credit for, that you recognized patterns, avoided certain wells, noticed how illness followed the rats and the cold. But recognition doesn't mean escape. You try to keep warm. You boil water, not because you're sure it helps, but because it's something to do. The smell of smoke makes your chest feel heavier. You wrap yourself in all the blankets you have, which isn't many, and hope that tomorrow you'll wake up stronger. You do. Sort of. The fever breaks, but everything aches. Your stomach feels hollow. Your arms tremble when you lift the bucket. And no one says, take another day to rest. You get up, because survival is a habit now, but the sickness has left its mark. You notice how many fewer voices there are around the fire. You see your neighbor's sheep wandering without a shepherd. You watch the priest pause longer between his words. You don't speak about the ones who are gone. There's no time to mourn properly. The barley still needs sowing. The cows still need tending. The thatch still leaks. And somehow, everything seems quieter. You miss even the annoying things. Someone snoring, someone arguing, someone complaining about cabbage again. The village does what it always does. It moves on, without moving forward. Someone marries, someone gives birth. Someone finds laughter again in a song. Life, like the weeds, keeps growing where it shouldn't. Even now, as you push the plow through sticky, cold earth, your cough lingers. You don't talk about it. The others don't ask. You've seen what happens to people who get too sick again too soon. They stop coming to the fields. Their names fade quickly. There's a rhythm in the pain, like background noise you've grown too familiar with to notice. Your joints creak. Your breath shortens. But your hands know the work. Your feet remember the path. And that's enough. And when you finally return home at sunset, when the shadows stretch long and the rooftops glow faintly gold, you sit beside the fire and let the warmth hit your face. You're alive today. That's all that matters. You stare into the flames, the cough still catching in your throat, and think, not for the first time, how fragile it all is. One sneeze, one rat, one shared cup. And yet, somehow, you're still here. But the walls of your world haven't changed. The same crooked fences, the same well-worn path to the fields, the same tree where the blackbird sings at dusk. The sickness passes, but the boundaries don't. Most peasants will never leave the place they were born. Your entire life plays out within a few square miles, if you're lucky. The road that disappears into the trees, that might as well lead to another world. A world with cities and spices and oceans you've never seen. You've heard rumors, of course, of ships the size of barns, of towers taller than any church, but you'll likely never lay eyes on them. And even if you wanted to leave, you couldn't. You're a serf, bound to the land like a weed to the soil. You need permission to go anywhere, not just to move villages, anywhere. Even visiting a market in the next town could raise questions. Why are you there? What business do you have? Who let you off your leash? If you disappear, the reeve will notice, and if you're found, you'll be brought back, punished, maybe fined, maybe worse. Some lords are lenient, others make examples. Branding isn't unheard of, neither is a week in the stocks. You've heard stories of people vanishing into the woods to live alone, but most of them come crawling back within a season. The wild is colder than the manor, and much less forgiving. There are travelers, though, pilgrims heading to shrines, merchants dragging carts of salted fish, friars with sandals and dusty robes. You envy them, not their poverty, but their motion. They've seen rivers with names you've only heard in sermons. They've slept in towns with stone walls and warm baths. Some speak different tongues. Some carry tiny coins with strange faces pressed into them. You once saw a peddler from across the channel who claimed he'd touched the bones of a saint. He had a finger in a wooden box to prove it, or so he said. Historians still argue how mobile medieval people actually were. Some records show surprising amounts of travel, pilgrimages, fairs, even labor migration. But the difference is choice. Pilgrims may walk for weeks, but they do it by choice. You can't even visit your cousin without a letter of approval from your Lord. You dream sometimes, just little daydreams, about seeing a castle not owned by your Lord, or dipping your feet in the sea, or standing at the gates of a city and looking up at the spires, your mouth open in wonder. It's a stupid fantasy, but it helps pass the hours. Even the seasons feel like walls. Spring means sowing, summer means weeding, autumn means harvest, winter means wood chopping, repairs, and praying the snow doesn't collapse the roof. Each one locks you into the same movements, year after year. Even your own footsteps feel rehearsed. You walk the same path to the fields each morning. You step over the same gnarled root outside the chapel. You pass the same patch of weeds growing stubbornly against the wall of the bakehouse. Some days, you swear the world has shrunk, folding in on itself like stale bread. And still, you go on. Because there are moments, quiet ones, that soften the trap. Like the first warm breeze of spring, or a festival where someone brings a real lute and everyone dances, terribly but joyfully. Or the glow of beeswax candles during a wedding mass. They don't undo the chains, but they make them easier to carry. Then there are the bad days. The days when a child asks what's beyond the hills, and you have to say, more hills. The days when the peddler tells a joke about foreign lands, and you laugh too loudly, because you'll never know if it's true. The days when your legs are too tired to walk the same old road, but you walk it anyway. The worst days are the quiet ones, when everything feels too still, when the birds are silent, when the sky is white and flat, when you can hear your own breathing and nothing else. That's when the fence posts seem taller. That's when the hedges look like walls. That's when the little part of you that still dares to hope starts to wither just a bit more. Still, tomorrow will come. It always does. The rooster will crow. The ox will groan. The same patch of earth will wait for your footprints. And you will rise, not because you're free, but because you don't know what else to do. You tuck your dreams into your sleeve like crumbs and walk the same path again. But you walk it carefully. Because in your world, even words can be dangerous. Say the wrong thing, and you might find yourself in trouble you didn't mean to cause. Trouble you might not come back from. Every village has its rhythms, its silences, its unwritten rules. And one of the oldest is this: don't speak too freely. Don't complain too loudly. Don't question what's above you. The Lord, the priest, the reeve, they're all listening, whether they're in the room or not. You've seen what happens when someone forgets. The baker's apprentice, just 15, made a joke about the steward's nose. He meant no harm. But someone repeated it. 2 days later, he was scrubbing chamber pots at the manor for a month. Another man, older and bitter from years of tithes and toil, said the priest was drinking too much wine. He vanished for 3 weeks. When he came back, he didn't speak above a whisper anymore. You learn to say the safe things. Talk about the weather, how it's too dry, too wet, too cold, Too hot. Talk about the harvest, how it's late again. Talk about the pigs, how one got loose and chewed through a neighbor's fence. Laugh when you're supposed to. Nod when expected. At church, you keep your head down. The priest might be kind, or he might not be. Either way, he speaks for God, and you don't question God. Not here. Not when the walls of the church echo with warnings of hellfire. Not when a misstep in the wrong season could mean disaster for your family. Faith is a shield, but sometimes it feels like a cage too. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers truly believed every word from the pulpit, or if some quietly held their doubts. You suspect many did both, believing on the surface, questioning in the dark, and praying no one noticed the difference. You're careful too around strangers. A traveling friar asks about your Lord's generosity, and you answer with vague praise. A merchant's man asks how the harvest fared, and you say, "Better than we deserved." Truth sits behind your teeth, but you've learned to keep it there. And there are always ears. The reeve's cousin, the steward's favorite, the quiet man at the edge of the alehouse who never laughs. Gossip flows like ale, but you never know who's listening or where your words will end up. One wrong story could bring a fine, a punishment, or worse, a visit from the manor's scribe, who smiles too much and never forgets a name. So you whisper your real thoughts at night, when the fire is low and the wind drowns your voice. You speak in metaphor. You joke in riddles. You share your fears with trusted friends, knowing even they could turn if pressed. But silence isn't safety either. The less you speak, the more others fill the gaps. "Did you hear?" they'll say. "He doesn't go to confession anymore." She talks to herself behind the stable. "I heard his grandfather was a heretic." And suddenly, your silence becomes its own kind of noise. So you find the balance. You say enough to stay known, but never so much that you stand out. You join in the laughter at the reeve's expense, but only when he's 3 drinks deep. You murmur prayers a little louder when the priest looks your way. You help neighbors when they ask, not because you want to be kind, but because it keeps people from asking the wrong kind of questions. And yet, despite all this, there's a strange comfort in the caution. Everyone plays the same game. Everyone knows the rules. It creates a rhythm, predictable, stable, survivable, until it doesn't. Until someone does say too much, like the thatcher's daughter, who claims she saw a ghost in the woods and now isn't allowed near the church. Or the boy who mocked the bishop's robes and is now being taught a lesson in the manor's storehouse. You hear his crying some nights, and no one talks about it. Sometimes, even the safest words become dangerous. A wrong look, a pause too long, a joke that lands poorly. One moment, you're a respected villager. The next, you're on the wrong side of a rumor. And once a rumor sticks, it doesn't wash off. So you walk the line every day. You teach your children to do the same. Speak soft, you tell them. Smile when spoken to, and never say more than you must. They nod. They understand. They have to. Because in your world, silence isn't just golden, it's armor. But no amount of silence can protect you from the weather. The sky doesn't care how tired you are. It doesn't ask if you finished sowing barley or if your roof is ready. It simply does what it wants. Soaks, freezes, withers, and you're left scrambling to catch up. Right now, it's raining again. Not a gentle spring drizzle, but a steady, soaking curtain that turns every road into sludge. Your boots sink. The cartwheels sink. The ox groans and refuses to move. And honestly, you can't blame it. The path to the fields is now a narrow trench of brown misery. And it's not just an inconvenience, it's a threat. Too much rain, and the seeds rot in the soil. Too little, and they dry before they ever take root. A late frost can kill the orchard, an early one can ruin the last of your cabbage. Weather is the difference between a winter of soup and a winter of hunger. The worst part? You have no warning, no forecast. You watch the clouds and guess. You note the way birds move, the smell of the wind, the way your bones ache. It's not science. It's superstition laced with survival instinct. You build patterns from memory, and when they fail, you shrug and say, God's will. Historians still argue whether peasants had their own methods of seasonal prediction, folk calendars, saints' days, lunar cycles. You suspect they did, but none of them could stop a sudden hailstorm or a summer so dry that even the weeds gave up. Last year, you lost half your wheat to flooding. The year before that, drought turned the pasture into dust. And once, years ago, there was a storm so fierce that it ripped the roof clean off your neighbor's barn. The wind screamed like a demon. You lay flat on the floor, clutching your children, praying the house would hold. Repairs take time and wood, two things you never seem to have enough of. You patch what you can, stuff moss into holes, stack stones where walls gave way. But the rain always finds the cracks. In summer, the sun can be just as cruel. You work under it for hours, your tunic soaked, your head pounding. There's no shade in the open fields. Your hands blister, your neck burns. You drink from the stream, knowing it might not be clean, but needing it anyway. And then winter returns, sharp and slow and smug. It creeps into your joints, steals the feeling from your toes, and turns your breath into smoke. The days shrink, the firewood vanishes. You bundle in every layer you own and still feel cold deep in your ribs. There's no insulation, no glass windows, just shutters and hope. You sleep huddled with your family, your breath visible in the dark, your teeth chattering. The animals stay inside with you sometimes, more for warmth than affection. You remember a winter so bad that your neighbor's cow froze standing up. You helped drag it out the next day, both of you quiet. You didn't say what you were both thinking, that the meat might keep the children fed a little longer. When it's not extreme, the weather becomes background noise, a daily nuisance, always inconvenient, never absent. You plan your life around it, but it rarely cooperates. Still, some find beauty in it. The way the snow softens every edge, makes the world quiet. The way the first rain after a dry spell smells sharp and green. The sound of wind in the trees at night, ominous, yes, but also familiar, like a lullaby sung by something ancient and uncaring. You mark time by the weather, not by dates, but by sensations. The summer when the stream dried up. The spring, we had 3 storms in 1 week. The autumn, the apples went bitter, each memory tied to something in the air or the ground. Even the holidays follow the seasons. Candlemas, Lammas, Michaelmas. You learn their rhythm because they tell you when to plant, when to harvest, when to brace for what's coming. You don't need a calendar. You have clouds and mud and the way your body starts to ache before the frost. So you carry on. You sow seeds even when the sky looks doubtful. You thatch the roof even though the wind keeps stealing your straw. You pray for balance. Just enough sun, just enough rain, nothing wild. And when that rare, perfect day comes, when the sun is warm, the wind gentle, and the crops seem to grow by themselves, you stop. You breathe. You let yourself believe, just for a moment, that maybe this year will be different. But deep down, you know the weather never makes promises. But neither does the forest. It looms at the edge of your world, dense, shadowed, full of mystery. Some call it a gift, others a curse. It's both, really. You rely on it. You fear it. You walk its edge like a tightrope, careful not to overstep. The forest gives you firewood, if you're quick and if no one sees. Technically, it belongs to the Lord, all of it. Every tree, every stick, every creature within. The law says you can gather fallen branches, nothing more. Chop down a tree and it's poaching, set a snare and it's theft. Kill a deer and it might cost you a hand. Still, people do it. Quietly, at night. You've done it. You know where the old paths are, where the brush grows thick enough to hide you. You move fast, with a blade dull from caution. You never take more than you need, and you always look back over your shoulder. The forest is a place of secrets, of wolves, or so you're told. You've heard howls in the distance, low, long, and mournful. Sometimes it's just wind through hollow trunks. Sometimes you're not so sure. You've seen tracks, too large for dogs, too fresh. You told yourself they were old. You didn't go back for days. There are stories, of course. Witches in the trees, spirits that mimic the voices of lost children. A glowing woman who leads travelers in circles until they die. You don't believe all of it, but you also don't go looking to disprove any of it. You cross yourself when passing certain groves. You tie bits of cloth to sacred trees. You whisper thanks to the hawthorn bush that hasn't let you down yet. But the real threat isn't wolves or witches, it's people. Specifically, other hungry peasants. Or worse, the Lord's foresters. They patrol the woods in twos, with dogs and spears and orders to make examples. You've seen what happens when someone's caught with a sack of mushrooms and a bloody arrow. You'd rather take your chances with the wolves. Still, you need the forest. For berries, herbs, mushrooms. For the rare bit of meat. For the bark you chew when your tooth aches and the nettles that your grandmother swears will bring your fever down. You've learned where the good spots are, which roots to dig, which berries not to eat. That knowledge is worth more than gold. Historians still debate how much forest access peasants truly had. Some say the rules were strict and cruel. Others argue that local custom often overrode written law. But you know that custom can vanish with a single new lord, or a bad harvest, or a steward trying to earn favor. And so you walk carefully, always. You teach your children to step lightly, to listen, to remember the way back. You tell them the forest is their friend, but a friend who might bite if you ask too much of it. Lately, the trees feel thinner. Wood is harder to find. More people are venturing deeper. A section that was once quiet now crackles with footprints and snapped branches. Someone said the monks are cutting timber for a new chapel roof. Someone else said the Lord sold part of it to a merchant from the coast. The forest doesn't belong to you. It never did. But it felt like it did. Like an ancient neighbor who nodded at your passing. Now it feels smaller, angrier, or maybe that's just you, tired of creeping and begging and apologizing to trees that can't hear you. Still, you go back. You always do. You bring a basket and a blade and hope. You thank the saplings when they bend away from the path. You place a stone at the fork in the trail so you don't get lost. And when the wind picks up and carries something whispery and strange through the leaves, you keep walking. You don't run. You don't look back, because even in the forest, there are eyes. You return from the forest just before the church bells ring. They echo across the village, slow and steady. One for morning, one for mass, one for every reason the church decides it's time to interrupt your day. You've learned to measure your life by those bells, as surely as by the seasons. Religion isn't a part of life here. It is life. It defines your days, your duties, your fears. Every Sunday, you go to Mass, no matter how tired you are, no matter how cold it is, no matter how many chores are waiting. You dress in your least dirty tunic and kneel in a pew beside your neighbors, breathing in the familiar scent of incense and damp wool. The priest speaks in Latin. You don't understand most of it, but you've heard it enough times that the rhythm feels comforting, like a lullaby, if lullabies came with eternal consequences. He talks of sin, of salvation, of saints and martyrs. He reminds you that suffering brings you closer to God, that your hardships are noble, that the meek shall inherit the earth. You try to believe him, even when your hands are cracked and bleeding and your stomach grumbles from missing breakfast. There are holy days too, more than you can count. Feasts for saints you've never heard of, celebrations of miracles you can't imagine. On those days, work is forbidden. You rest, sort of. You attend more services, eat slightly better food if you're lucky, and try not to think about how far behind the fields are falling. And then there are fasts, long stretches of no meat, no dairy, no fun. You pretend not to mind. It's not like you had meat or dairy anyway. But watching the steward enjoy roast goose while you gnaw a turnip does something sour to your spirit. Still, the church offers more than just rules. It offers ritual, predictability, even beauty. The way the light filters through the tiny stained glass window when the sun hits just right. The sound of voices rising in unsteady hymns. The smooth wood of the pew beneath your fingertips, worn by generations of equally exhausted believers. Historians still argue about how sincere peasant devotion was. Some say it was deep and constant. Others suggest it was more practical, superstition wrapped in habit. You think it's both. You believe, but you also fear. You pray, but you also hedge your bets. You cross yourself before entering the forest. You whisper a prayer before sowing seeds. You bury a charm under the threshold when your baby runs a fever. Because sometimes the church isn't enough. You've seen miracles maybe, or coincidences. A cow nearly dies, but recovers after you leave an offering at the crossroads. A storm turns away after your grandmother mutters something old and half forgotten. You're not sure what works, but you know better than to stop doing any of it. The priest wouldn't approve. He calls them pagan holdovers. He warns against charms and moon talk. But you still see him flinch when the dog howls during Vespers. You still see the tiny dried herbs he carries in his own pocket. The church watches, always. You're expected to confess regularly, and while most sins are small, bad thoughts, short tempers, a stolen egg, every confession carries weight. The priest listens and remembers. And if your sins seem too frequent, too strange, too unrepentant, you might be sent for penance. Sometimes it's a few extra prayers. Sometimes it's public humiliation, kneeling in the mud with a sign that says sinner. You've seen it, you've done it, and still, the weight doesn't lift. And if someone is accused of something worse, witchcraft, heresy, pride too bold to be ignored, the village watches it unfold like a storm. Quiet, afraid, complicit. A woman who talks too much. A man with too many books. A child who dreams strange dreams. Doesn't take much. So you stay in your lane. You make the sign of the cross. You offer your coin, if you have one. You bow your head and try not to think too loudly. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, you wonder, if heaven is so good, why is everything here so hard? If suffering is holy, why does the steward never seem to suffer? If God is listening, why are your prayers always the same? You don't ask these questions aloud. You kneel, you bow, you keep singing, and when the final bell rings, you rise with the others, blinking in the sunlight, and step back into the world, still aching, still tired, but at least a little less alone. You step back into the world, and it smells like smoke and livestock and sweat. Home again. Your home isn't much. A single room with a thatched roof and walls of wattle and daub, mud and straw and wood, crumbling at the corners, but still holding. The floor is dirt. The windows are shutters. The air is heavy, especially in summer, when the thatch traps heat like a baker's oven. You share the space with your entire family, parents, siblings, maybe a grandparent or two, and animals. Always animals. A few chickens, a goat, sometimes a pig or sheep if you're lucky, or desperate. They sleep in the corners, shuffle about during the night, and make noises that no one bothers to hush anymore. Everyone just adjusts. Privacy doesn't exist. Modesty is a luxury you gave up years ago. You bathe in a wooden tub once a week, if the weather allows, if someone remembered to heat the water, if you're not too tired to care. Lice are constant. Fleas are inevitable. Gregory and his entire extended insect family remain your loyal companions. Your bed is straw, maybe topped with an old sack or a thin blanket. You sleep curled up beside others, layered like kindling. You wake to elbows in your ribs and someone's foot in your back. But at least you wake. The hearth is the heart of the home. It's where you cook, if you have anything to cook. It's where you gather when it's cold, where you dry your socks, where you tell stories, where you occasionally argue about who forgot to shut the door and let the goat in again. Meals are quiet, not because there's nothing to say, but because eating takes focus when every bite tastes like desperation. You scrape bowls clean, you chew slowly, you make sure the little ones get their fill first. If someone's sick, you feed them broth and pretend it'll help. There's little rest in rest. Even when you're sitting, you're mending something, clothes, tools, fences. You're grinding grain, combing wool, twisting rope, scraping pots. Your hands never stop moving. If they do, someone notices. Someone asks, "Don't you have something to do?" Children grow up fast. They don't have time to be children for long. As soon as they can hold something, they're helping, feeding animals, carrying buckets, weeding rows. You watch them learn the rhythms of toil, and you wish you could delay it, just a little. But time doesn't bend for peasants. It marches on, hard and unsmiling. You teach them what you know, how to dig without breaking your back, how to stay out of the reeve's way, how to smile without showing teeth. You hope they'll survive. You hope they'll stay kind. Historians still debate how strong peasant families were, whether they clung together or fractured under pressure. You know the answer depends on the day. Some days, your family is your entire world. You laugh together, sing together, shield each other from the worst of it. Other days, the closeness feels suffocating. Tempers flare, voices rise. Someone slams a door that doesn't really close anyway. And there's grief. Always grief. Small losses, big ones. A child dies. A parent fades. A sibling leaves for the monastery and never writes. You don't have funerals, so much as final chores. Wrap the body, dig the hole, say a prayer, go back to work. But there's joy, too. Strange, stubborn joy. When a baby takes their first step, when someone brings back a rare bit of honey, when the snow falls silently and makes everything look briefly clean. You make room for moments like that. You have to. Otherwise, the weight of survival becomes too heavy. So you sing when you can. You laugh when you're able. You tell stories that stretch the truth just enough to make people smile. At night, after the fire has dimmed and the animals have settled, you lie awake and listen to the sounds of life all around you, snoring, breathing, shifting, the soft murmur of a lullaby. Someone sings out of habit. You stare at the ceiling, patched and dark, and think about tomorrow. The same chores, the same struggles, the same cracked hands and aching knees. But also, maybe, a joke by the well. Maybe a fish in the stream. Maybe a breeze through the open door that smells like growing things. Your home is small, cramped, crowded, but it's yours. And inside, for all its noise and filth and fleas, you are not alone. The baby stirs in the night, and you reach out by instinct, cradling their small warm body against yours. The fire is low, the room is quiet, the days blur together. But this little heartbeat is clear. Birth and death are the twin bookends of peasant life, and they both come sooner than you'd like. Most people you know were married before they turned 18. There's no courting in candlelight, no long letters or love poems. Matches are made out of practicality. Who has land? Who needs help? Who can work? If love comes, it comes later, after the shared work, the shared struggle. If it doesn't, you still make do. Weddings are modest, a simple church ceremony, followed by a lot of ale, a few borrowed instruments, and maybe some meat, if the village pitched in. The bride wears her best tunic, which is still probably patched. The groom tries to look taller. Children watch with wide eyes, knowing their turn won't be far off. Once you're married, life accelerates. There's always something to do, a house to share, land to till, livestock to manage, and soon, children. Childbirth is terrifying. There's no midwife in your village, just the older women, hands shaking but sure. No pain relief, no clean linens, no promises. You've known women who bled too much, who faded in front of your eyes. You've seen babies born silent. You've seen tiny bundles buried before they were named. When a baby does cry out strong and loud, everyone breathes easier. You wrap them in whatever cloth you can spare. You hold them close. You whisper their name, knowing it might not be spoken long. Infant mortality is common. So common, it becomes a background hum of grief. You know mothers who've buried 3, 4, 5 children, fathers who never speak of the ones lost. But still, you try again, because what else can you do? You watch your children grow fast, too fast. They toddle for a year, then they're carrying buckets, gathering firewood, pulling weeds. There's no childhood here, not in the modern sense. Just smaller people doing smaller jobs. But sometimes, they laugh like children anywhere. Sometimes they chase chickens or pretend sticks are swords, or build little kingdoms in the mud. And then they get older, their backs start to bend, their hands start to harden, and they become you. You look at your own parents and realize they were never old, just tired, just worn. They lived through floods and famine, illness and loss. They buried friends. They lived long enough to be called wise, which mostly means they outlived the people who remembered their mistakes. Historians still debate the average lifespan of a medieval peasant. Some say 35. Others argue that if you survive childhood, you might live to 50 or 60. But you've seen how quickly life can vanish. One infection, one accident, one winter too harsh. Age feels like a gamble, not a destination. You've seen death come quietly and quickly, a fall from a ladder, a fever that didn't break, a simple cut that turned angry and red. And you've seen people hold on, stubbornly, through pain and hunger and grief, simply because they had no other choice. When someone dies, there's no grand ceremony. The priest says a few words. The neighbors dig the hole. The family weeps quietly, then goes back to the fields. Because the wheat still grows, the animals still need feeding. The work never pauses, not even for death. Still, you remember. You whisper their names. You tell the children stories, some true, some softened. You light a candle on their feast day. You leave a bit of bread at the edge of the forest, just in case. And through it all, you keep going. You marry, you raise children, you bury your dead. And somehow, you keep finding moments worth holding on to. A shared loaf of fresh bread, a hand squeezed tight during a storm, a baby's sleepy sigh. Life is short, but it's full. And tonight, with the baby finally still in your arms, and the fire casting long shadows across the packed dirt floor, you close your eyes and give thanks for another day. Even if it was hard, even if tomorrow will be harder, you lived it. And sometimes you fight for it. Not often. Open rebellion isn't exactly encouraged when you're barefoot and armed with nothing but a hoe, but even the quietest fields can grow thorns. And sometimes, when the hunger gets too sharp or the taxes too high, something inside you snaps. It starts small, a whispered complaint, a loaf of bread gone missing from the manor storehouse, a handful of grain kept when it should have been tithed. You don't call it rebellion, you call it survival. But rebellion, like fire, spreads fast when the wind is right. You remember the stories? Everyone does. The revolt back in 81. Men marching with pitchforks, shouting for justice, demanding fairer taxes and an end to serfdom. They carried homemade banners. They sang songs with bitter joy. They believed change was possible. And then the king's men arrived. Steel met wood. Banners fell. Fields ran red. And when it was over, the stories changed. They weren't rebels anymore. They were traitors, criminals, names erased, graves unmarked. Still, some say they were right, braver than the rest. Fools, maybe, but honorable ones. Historians still argue whether they stood a chance. Some say they were doomed from the start. Others say their voices echoed loud enough to matter, even in defeat. You've seen smaller rebellions, closer to home. A man who refused to pay a new tax and fled to the woods. A woman who cursed the steward to his face and vanished before sunrise. The miller who doctored the weights, so peasants got a bit more flour. Small acts, risky ones. You admire them quietly. You don't speak their names unless you trust the wind. There are other ways to rebel too. You sing songs that mock the Lord, only after dark. You gather herbs the priest says are forbidden. You teach your children to ask why, even when you know the answer is dangerous. And sometimes you just say no, not loudly, not with fists raised, but with quiet defiance. You plant seeds on a day the calendar forbids. You skip mass once and claim illness. You keep a coin hidden, just in case. These are the rebellions that matter, not because they change the world, but because they let you breathe a little deeper in it. But every rebellion has a cost. You've seen people caught, a girl who stole eggs, public whipping, a boy who insulted the priest, banished, a man who refused labor duty, dragged through the village in chains. You watched. You didn't cheer. You didn't cry. You learned. So you weigh your choices. You measure your words. You carry your anger like embers, hot enough to feel, hidden enough not to burn. Sometimes the pressure boils over. A dispute about land turns into a shouting match. Someone throws a punch. Someone's brother joins in. Before you know it, half the village is shouting, and the other half is watching. The steward hears. Punishments follow. Life returns to normal, but not really. Trust erodes like old mortar. You start watching each other a little closer, and yet you keep going. Because even small defiance is a kind of dignity. Because even a whispered no still echoes. Because no matter how much they try to crush you under boots and taxes and prayers, you're still here. There's power in that. You survive, not just because you're obedient, but because you're clever, because you remember, because you don't let them take everything. Not your humor, not your stories, not your fire. You tell tales of the old ones, the ones who fought and lost and mattered anyway. You teach your children how to listen, how to wait, how to resist in ways that don't look like resistance. You don't dream of revolution, but you do dream of fairness, of a Lord who listens, of a priest who serves bread before sermons, of a year with enough rain and not too much frost. It's not rebellion, not really, but it's enough, for now. For now, you work. You wake up sore, go to bed sore, and in between, you fill your day with the endless repetition of life at the bottom. But even here, even in this cracked and crooked world, there are moments of peace, slivers of joy that slide in between the aching. You hear it in the music on feast days, not professional music, just someone with a fiddle, maybe a drum, maybe a voice strong enough to lead around. The rhythm is always the same, but it never gets old. Feet stomp the earth, hands clap. Someone whistles off key. It's enough to make you forget the mud and the hunger, even if just for a few minutes. You feel it at the market too. Once a week, if you're lucky, your village hosts a small one. If not, you walk to the next town over, balancing a basket on your hip and coins in your sleeve. There's color there, cloth dyed in deep blues and rusty reds, trinkets made of horn and wood, sweetbread that smells so good it makes your jaw ache. You don't buy much, but you touch everything, just to feel different textures under your fingers. And there's laughter. Always, somehow there's laughter. Over spilled milk, over a goat that won't listen, over someone's wildly inaccurate story about kissing a merchant's daughter. You laugh because it makes the days feel less heavy, because if you don't, the silence presses too close. You find joy in ale, flat, weak, barely alcoholic, but comforting, in the way your child hugs your leg after feeding the chickens, in the moment when the sky turns pink over the field and you realize you've made it through another day. There's pride too. You built this hut. You grew that cabbage. You fixed the roof, even if it still leaks. You don't own the land, but you've shaped it with your bare hands. That counts for something. Historians don't always write about these parts. They talk about the suffering, the taxes, the diseases, and fair enough. Those things are real. They weigh heavy. But they're not the whole story. Because you've seen neighbours come together after a storm flattened a barn. You've seen the poorest family give their last loaf to someone hungrier. You've heard prayers said not out of fear, but out of love. You've seen a mother cradle her newborn, even knowing the odds. You've watched an old man teach a boy how to tie a proper knot, even when his hands tremble. You've sat beside a friend at the fire, neither of you speaking, both of you understanding. You have little, less than little, some days, but you also have enough. Enough to keep going. Enough to believe, on your best days, that things might get easier. And that belief is its own kind of wealth. The fire is low now. The village is quiet. Outside, a dog barks once, then falls silent. You shift under your blanket and close your eyes. The wind brushes the shutters. Somewhere nearby, someone snores. The baby murmurs in sleep. You feel the ache in your legs, the calluses on your hands, the tightness in your shoulders. And yet, you also feel warm. Tired, yes, but safe for now. Tomorrow you'll do it all again. The same chores, the same fields, the same prayers. But tonight, you rest. Tonight you've earned that rest, because even in a world stacked against you, even under all the weight and worry, you've managed to carve out a life. Not a grand one, not an easy one, but yours. So let the rain fall, let the wind howl, let the Lord complain and the crops surprise you. You'll still be here, still standing, still surviving. Outside, the world settles into sleep. A sheep shifts in the pen. The last owl of the evening calls once, then goes quiet. Even the wind, which gusted all day, has hushed into a soft, steady sigh against the walls. You let your thoughts drift to warm bread on a cold morning, to the soft weight of a child's hand in yours, to the quiet pride of a harvest stored safely away, to a joke shared beneath the stars, to one more day completed. Let it all fade now. The weight of your tools, the sting of the cold, the distant worry of taxes, of storms, of sore backs and aching knees. Let it slip into the dark where it can't follow you. Not tonight. You are safe. You are home. The fire may be low, the roof may creak, but tonight the quiet wraps around you like a thick cloak. It says, you did enough. You are enough. So let the sleep come slowly, like snowfall over fields. Let it cover you, soft and sure. Let it fill the spaces where worry used to sit. Let it carry you somewhere warm. The world can wait until morning. For now, just rest. Good night.